a very warm, literally and figuratively, welcome back to the Access Vikings podcast. I am Emily Leiker, and I'm joined by my Minnesota Star Tribune colleagues, Andrew Krammer and Ben Goessling. The 2025 season is upon us. We were all at TCO Performance Center earlier today for Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's training camp opening press conference. I'm still at TCO, as you can see by my background, but how does it feel to be back, everyone? Welcome back from PTO.
Yeah, it's good to be back at it. It's time for football, and I don't know. It was fun to be back out there today. It's fun to think about what the season will be. I think this is going to be one of the more intriguing seasons we've seen in a while. So I'm ready to get going. Should be a lot of fun to see where this thing goes.
I'm ready to see McCarthy play some real football finally. I think pads come on not until a week from now, but hey, we're back and we're inching closer to being fully back.
What season is this for each of you now? Not to date you, I'm sorry.
Oh, boy.
14 for me. I think it'd be 13 for you.
Yeah, 12 full-time and 13. Yeah, I had a little freelance one in there. But yeah, I didn't get to cover Mike Zimmer getting hired. Wasn't getting paid for that one.
And I guess I'm hitting like a 1.5 where it's about 1.5, season 1.5 for me. Because I'll always have my half season to start with. But like I mentioned, we heard from KO and Kwesi today, just kind of to get everyone back in the flow of things. We're going to hear from KO again tomorrow. I presume that will be even a little bit more like the nitty-gritty of specific players and what camp's going to look like, all of that. Couple big takeaways from today. I think the biggest of which is some injury updates we got, namely with those offensive lineman guys. Ben, what did we hear about Christian Darrisaw and then also Will Fries?
Yeah, probably limited work for Darrisaw early, individual drills primarily, which is kind of what we expected. I think they'll probably be fairly cautious with him through most of training camp. I would expect, maybe we'll see him in the later half of it, maybe a little bit in joint practices, maybe even a little bit later than that. But yeah, I think they'll continue to be cautious with him. But Will Fries being fully cleared for training camp, I think, is probably the biggest development of that, because we have not seen him at all yet. Had that tibia fracture, I think, week 5 last year with the Colts. So that is a big piece of this whole thing. Obviously, the most expensive piece of their offseason with that 5-year, $88 million contract, and a guy that they targeted to help fix that spot that Kevin O'Connell pretty bluntly said after that loss to the Rams needed to get fixed. So the fact that he's ready to go, that we'll get to see that interior offensive line, that's certainly something we're going to probably talk a lot about throughout camp. But the fact that he is fully cleared, I thought was fairly significant. And then Rondale Moore, none of those 3 guys are going on the pup. Darrisaw, Moore, Fries, and we'll see, kind of what Rondale Moore's time frame looks like here as well. But the fact that they're all 3 doing well enough that the Vikings did not put any of them on the pup list, I think is fairly significant at this stage of it.
Yeah, it would all seem to indicate they can all practice in some shape or form at this point after physicals, which is great. And yeah, Ben, with Fries, he's just been kind of the guy who stands off on the side, wearing the jersey, just kind of watching. Haven't even seen him put a helmet on and do anything yet with this team. So that's the exciting part, is to get to finally, if you're the Vikings, if you're the coaches, get to finally see this guy out there. And I think the big part with him back is you'll get to truly start in earnest the quote unquote competition at left guard, where Donovan Jackson and Blake Brandel have been splitting time, and where Donovan was really fixated, I suppose, this spring with Blake working in Will's spot on the right side. But now if Will's back, or eventually when he gets to the point of doing full team, yeah, Ben, we'll finally start, and Emily, we'll start to see that competition there at left guard.
Yeah, that's a great point, Andrew. And, one of the things that stood out to me about what O'Connell said about Fries returning is that, like, from a physical standpoint, he's 100% ready to go, but he did kind of make the reminder that Fries is having to learn a whole new offensive system here. He's only been with the Colts before he came in and did not get that on the field kind of hands-on learning in the spring that like Ryan Kelly did and some of these other new guys along the line, or guys kind of switching positions on the line. So his kind of development this fall is going to be more about that, I think. And so it will be curious to see like how quickly you can see that in action and see him kind of understanding what this looks like on this line. Those guys all avoided the PUP list, as we already said. We will note that 2 rookies did land on that list. Tight end Gavin Bartholomew, who throughout OTAs, we saw him off to the side. I went back through my notes, and I think that was an injury suffered on the very first day of of OTAs that we got to watch. We saw him in his helmet that day, and then he left and came back in tennis shoes and didn't really work out much. He was off to the side and did stuff, but was not in team workouts the rest of OTAs. That's a lower back injury issue that he's working through, Kevin said today. And then linebacker Chaz Chambliss, which is like a great football name, Chaz, he is dealing with I believe, right foot injury is what we heard.
Ben, who are the better football names we've heard go through a Viking training camp? I think of Chaz Chambliss is up there. Max Tooley was one who was coming through recently. I thought that was a great football name. There was a Tug. Case Cookus. Thank you. Yep. Remember there was Tough Borland. You remember Tough Borland?
Tough Borland. There was Storm Norton.
Storm Norton. Who had the tattoo of Storm from X-Men, like Halle Berry on his back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's right. He made the team enough that we got to be in the locker room and witness such things. Lucky us. Yes. I'm trying to think. There have been others, but
I put you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, I should. Yeah, I got to think through the other ones, but
Chaz Chambliss,
Randall McDaniel,
Chaz Surratt. Yeah, we didn't cover Randall McDaniel, but we at least are familiar with him. So
that's good.
The one I remember is the story takes too long. Forget it.
we'll tack it. We'll come back to it at the end and tack it on as a little post credits segment here. Other news kind of that we heard today, and I'm actually going to play the clip of this kind of exchange between ESPN reporter Kevin Seifer and then KO and Kwesi here talking about Josh Metellus, who, to jog memories, we saw during OTAs, but pretty much was only limited to individual work. We know he's looking for a new contract. His agent negotiated a couple new contracts for other Vikings players this spring, but Metellus's is still not done. We've talked about that a lot, but I want to play what they said about whether he'll be participating in training camp, and then we can talk a little bit from there.
You anticipate Josh Metellus participating in everything for camp? Maybe for Kevin, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I know Josh is. We had all players are here and accounted for, and I know Josh has been very much looking forward to training camp getting going, and I think he's one of our captains, one of our leaders, and even throughout the spring was integral in kind of how Flo and the defensive group are looking at 2025.
He didn't do everything during the spring, just to be clear. Like you expect him to do everything. You understand he's doing everything.
Well, we understand. We have great dialogue with his agent. We'll continue to have that, and we'll navigate from there.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're going to see tomorrow with our own two eyes when we go to practice whether he's out there or not. So kind of leaving aside, like, debating if we think he will be or not, I guess if he were to decide to hold in, only do limited stuff, like how much do we think that would matter in the grand scheme of getting ready for this season?
I mean, I think it matters in the sense that they want to do a lot of different things with him. And he plays a pretty singular role, I guess, in this defense. Nobody really does what he does, but and we haven't really seen them play much without him. He's been on the field quite a bit the last couple of years. He's pretty much an every down player, but I don't know that it is a huge deal just because they've had this happen a couple of times, and it's something that players end up doing, and you avoid the fines, which are no longer the teams no longer have the option to kind of get rid of the fines on the side. I mean, basically, if players miss training camp, they're fined on a daily basis for the practices they miss. And it used to kind of be that teams could forgive the fines once the deal got done. That is no longer the case. So what you see players do instead is hold in, where it's, I'm going to be here, but I'm not going to do anything. I mean, a couple of years ago, we've seen a couple of these. We saw with Danielle Hunter, and then TJ Hawkinson with the fabled ear infection a few years ago, and then that magically got resolved right about the time that the contract. Well, the ear got done, and then wasn't there some other thing? Do you have a leg or a lower back thing or something that they came up with a new one, and then all of a sudden, as soon as he signed that contract, everything was healed. So, yeah, I don't know that. I mean, if it gets to the point where they're like, look, we're not going to do a deal right now, I can't imagine that Josh Metellus is sitting there saying, I've got enough leverage to just sit forever. I mean, he is going to need to play and demonstrate his worth both to this team and I think to anybody else that may want to see him and kind of decide whether they want to invest in him, because it is such a unique position that he plays that, I think they'd want as much. I think his camp would want as much tape as possible of him doing different things, so you can go to other teams and project, here's how he would fit in your scheme. He can map into things other than just the Brian Flores kind of rover role, although there are a lot of teams that would find value in a player like that. But I wouldn't think that he's sitting there saying, I've got so much leverage in such a market outside of Minnesota that I can miss, copious amounts of time and still feel good about it. So I would think we'll see him. I would think that if they're going to get a deal done, they won't, drag this out longer than necessary. If the conversations are continuing about that, I guess I feel like it probably gets done. It makes sense for him to be in Minnesota. I think the fit is better here than it is anywhere else, and they're going to need safety, a solidified safety situation going forward with Harrison Smith, probably kind of on a year-to-year basis here, and you're kind of figuring out what it looks like beyond that.
You'd like to think Harrison Smith is on a year-to-year basis. You'd like to think, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it could be the last one. We'll see. But, we've said that a few times before that we've all thought he was going to be done, and maybe not.
It is a good point about that you saw Cam Bynum go out the door already. Harrison Smith has to be done at some point with his career. So can you afford to lose Josh Metellus and kind of start almost from scratch at that position? It'll be interesting to see how much they value him and all of the above, but whether or not he practices, to me, it's just kind of chatter about nothing when it comes to the general public, because yes, coaches want him to practice. Yes, they want him to, when his assignment sheet is in, not have any missed assignments, not have any mental errors, all these things in practices. But he's also a guy that when his family's out at Disney World, he's talking about studying the 2024 quarterback class in his offseason because he cares that much about what the Vikings are going to do in the draft. Like, this guy's so football all the time that I can't imagine they or anybody seriously worried about this missed practice, if that's what happens, affecting him. Now, what's interesting is that, Ben, we saw both Byron Murphy and Cam Bynum not sign new deals with the Vikings going into contract years, and then both get really paid this offseason. Josh just saw that. He knows that you can be Harrison Smith and stay one place for 13 years, but he also saw Cam Bynum maximize his potential and his profits. So I wonder how much the people close to him and what he's seen his own teammates do, Murphy betting on himself and still staying with the Vikings, how much that all affects his kind of mentality here of like, hey, I'm not going to sign for what I think for less than what I think I'm worth, when I've just seen my buddies go out there and get what they think they're worth.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see kind of his calculus on this, because one thing, Drew Rosenhaus reps him, and one thing you typically have seen with Rosenhaus clients is if there's momentum to get a deal done, Rosenhaus, I think, has leaned a little more on the side of let's get the deal done rather than this sort of long-standing stare down game. We've seen that. This year, Aaron Jones gets done, Andrew Van Ginkel gets done, and certainly, Drew Rosenhaus has a long list of clients across all 32 teams in the NFL. You don't need to just look at the recent Vikings signings to kind of see the overall playbook over the years. But I think if there is a deal to do, I think he tends to be more on the side of let's get the thing done and let's get it signed, more so than kind of waiting for every last dollar. So, we'll see how that goes, but, just a little bit of context. Every agent obviously has a different playbook on this, but I think Rosenhaus maybe leaning a little more in that direction could, be something that nudges Metellus one way or the other. And it will depend. I think if Metellus feels like, no, I want to play this out and test my market and give myself as much possible leverage as I can get, maybe it goes that way. It's just, it's an interesting situation because he is in a lot of ways a pretty individualized case. This is a guy the Vikings cut and then they re-signed, and you're kind of saying, okay, this is a practice squad, or not a practice squad, it's a special teams player that we're going to sign to kind of a projection type extension of let's get him locked in, thinking he's going to play more of a role in special teams, and then he comes to be this integral piece in this defense that, I've said it, he has blown past incentives in a way that I've never seen a Vikings player do, which tells you he did things they were not expecting him to do, because teams do not write incentives in a way that players hit them and max them out in the way that Josh Metellus has done it. So that tells you that the Vikings were, or at least the contract department was surprised by what he did, and the role they envisioned for him was different than the one he ended up playing. So I think in that case, there's going to be a lot of interesting discussion here. I'm just kind of fascinated to see what they do with this one, because it's, it's probably my cap wonk side that gets a little more interested in this one, but I just think it's a unique case with Metellus, given the role he's played and kind of given his career arc with the Vikings.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, just even from football perspective too. But we've talked about before when he signed that deal. It was he had said he got special teams contracts pulled for the top special teamers, and that's kind of what they did the deal on. And then suddenly he's a 95% defender. And you made the point earlier that I thought was great of, we don't really know what this defense looks like without him. So it is interesting because of how much he plays. It'd be interesting to see if they get to 11-on-11 work in camp here, what they're going to do if he's not participating.
Well, and the other thing to mention here on the Metellus discussion is he has been pretty closely linked with Brian Flores, obviously. The Josh Metellus role has been maximized by Brian Flores. Brian Flores also is in a contract year. So how that goes, if you sign Metellus thinking this is a guy that has to be part of Brian Flores' defense, it's easier to map that out if that defense looks the same in 26, 27, going beyond that as it does in 25. And it's very possible that it will. It's very possible that Flores is back. It's very possible that they keep a similar scheme if it's somebody like Durante Jones that's promoted. Also possible that if Flores is not here, given how much this thing is a product of him kind of doing the mad scientist thing a little bit, it's another fascinating component of this is how do you map out player utility, assuming one thing versus assuming another. And I'm sure this is all part of the discussion they're having as they try to figure this one out.
That's a great point. You'd feel better if Brian Flores were signed to sign Josh.
One more kind of newsier thing from today before we get into more of the fun kind of takeaways. Ben, you did ask them about if there has been any communication from the league yet on Jordan Addison, who did plead to a lesser charge last week for that arrest that he had in July 2024 out in LA.
I was on PTO. I didn't catch it.
He pled down from a DUI to a wet reckless, which is exactly what it sounds like, a wet reckless driving charge, which is still a very weird phrase to say as well, but pled down. And he pled no contest. So he still technically has not admitted any sort of guilt in this situation, even though he pled to that charge. And so my read on that, just being the one kind of writing through that and seeing what was communicated last week from his lawyer and in the statement from his agent as well, is that maybe they're hoping that the no contest of it all like alleviates some of the punishment here, but I think everyone is still under the impression that there will be some sort of suspension from the league. It just, that has not come out yet. The league is still doing their investigation. They said that in a comment to me last week that that's where they were at. And then today, Kwesi said that there has been no timeline for when that will come down communicated to them. So do we have any thought? I mean, you guys, you've been away, but do we have any thoughts on the situation?
Yeah. Well, one thing to think about there is on the no contest thing. I just, as you started talking about this, it made me think back. Adrian Peterson pleaded no contest to, I believe, misdemeanor charges of reckless assault in Texas back in 2014, and the whole ordeal that season about him disciplining his kids, or what he called disciplining his kids, and obviously there was a felony charge of injury to a child that came out of that he pleaded no contest to, and he got suspended a couple of weeks after that without pay for the season, and then He appealed that, and I think it was December of that year. Actually, I'm quite certain it was December of that year, because I remember the day it happened. My wife was like 40 weeks pregnant with my second daughter, who was born December 16th of that year. So I remember very well when this all got resolved. But point is, no contest in the league's disciplinary eye, and that obviously was a very high-profile case, and that was coming right out of Ray Rice, and the league was kind of sort of trying to make a statement and send a message, at least very much how Adrian felt with things. But no contest did not keep him from bearing the brunt of discipline from the league in that particular situation. So, to the extent that applies, we have to see. All of these things are individual, but I just bring that up to say that no contest, there is precedent of that, the league looking at that and saying, okay, we're still going to operate as if that is a manner of admission of guilt.
Ben, would it be worthwhile to note too that while this is a first-time offense for him under the league's alcohol substance abuse policy, I guess I should note it is a first-time offense for him, even though he got pulled over for speeding earlier. So I think fans might see like, oh, this guy's in the news every summer for something, but this in the league's eyes should be just a first-time offender, right? Yeah,
you're right, because there was no legal charge beyond speeding for the 143 miles an hour thing in 2023. So there was nothing that would have kind of tripped that alarm, I guess. And I suppose they can look at it and say, okay, this is another example of a lack of responsibility. I suppose that can come into it. But if you're just evaluating it on this particular incident, I wouldn't think there'd be legal reason for that to be tied in. But, we'll have to bring in the Star Tribune's legal expert some other time. We should get some lawyer on. If you're a lawyer listening to this and you want to pop in and be our legal expert and get a retainer fee that's far less than what you make in the rest of your daily work, give us a call. We can figure something out.
Yeah. If the league is just looking at it as just alcohol offenses, maybe just first time. But you're right. Maybe they looked at the discretionary thing or look at it in their discretion and say, you know what, we're going to include that this just isn't not a good decision maker in the summer sometimes.
Yeah, and the standard for that first time offense is 3 games. So presumably if this all gets handed down before the first game of the season, that would line him up, if he were to get that suspension, to return for the international games, which would then be an interesting storyline of, okay, your first game back is in Dublin in a different time zone. Haven't been doing anything on the field. Like, what does that look like? But we will continue to cross that bridge when the league decides that they want to cross it, and then makes everything else move for everyone else. Let's talk other takeaways from Kwesi and KOC today. Andrew, let's start with you. Like, what else stood out from what we heard today? Obviously, a lot of JJ talk, but there were some other things sprinkled in there as well.
I think in terms of the offensive line and the quarterback relationship, O'Connell immediately went to, and this was kind of an open-ended, the question didn't have too fine of a point to it, but Kevin took it and said, you know what, I'm going to talk about JJ McCarthy and Ryan Kelly, and saying like, that's kind of where he started with talking about McCarthy and this newfangled O-line that they have. And that's just going to be so important to them. And all spring we heard them talk about it, but McCarthy and Kelly being on the same page, and Kelly kind of taking McCarthy under his wing a little bit in terms of what he needs to know, in terms of how an offensive line thinks in the NFL, how a center thinks in the NFL, how he can help him adjust things, and all the above. And those two guys, I think, are going to have, beyond O'Connell and McCarthy and Kelly might have the most important, well, McCarthy and Jefferson too, but those tentacles that branch off the quarterback, that center is going to be an incredibly important one. And it's one of the things I'd written down from what we heard about just O'Connell being the first to bring that up. It's on his mind, and he's going to want those two guys kind of tethered at the hip. So I think it's great news that this offensive line seems healthier than what it looked like back in June. And if those guys can be even involved somewhat altogether in 11-on-11 drills by those joint practices, maybe before the second preseason game, that's great news for McCarthy and where he's at.
Well, and O'Connell mentioned it about this defense and practicing against it, but in terms of a quarterback and a center getting on the same page in terms of setting protections, this defense gives you plenty to sharpen yourself up against. So the fact that everybody is ready to go, I think that is a big component of this as well, because you're right, that is a really important part of this whole thing, that the center, especially for a young quarterback, becomes such an integral part of assessing fronts and figuring out where do we need to send protections, where do we need to send the running back, where do we need to slide, all of those kinds of things, that when you have a quarterback that's this new at it, that center is going to play a bigger role. You're not talking about, Peyton Manning or Phillip Rivers, who Ryan Kelly has played with. Kevin O'Connell mentions him today. Somebody that's seen everything and can basically do it. I mean, Kirk Cousins used to do this basically by himself. Garrett Bradbury helped him with it, but I think they trusted Kirk enough because of his experience to say he had the final say in setting protections. I don't think we've gotten a full answer to this yet, if J.J. McCarthy will have that as well. I think it's safe to assume that Ryan Kelly, given his experience and given J.J. McCarthy's inexperience, will have a larger role than you'd expect from a 10th-year quarterback.
Yeah, I do remember when JJ got drafted, Kevin O'Connell told a bunch of us when they were going through kind of why they drafted him. Here's his Michigan stuff and all this. They'd mentioned like this guy handled protections and this the intellect. Like I think he was trying to work against maybe or at least what he was saying, worked against the kind of notion that Jim Harbaugh hid McCarthy and that they didn't want him to do a lot. And O'Connell wanted to know, like, no, this guy handled a lot of stuff behind the scenes and also on the field at Michigan, including protections. But you're right. The NFL is such a different animal that you got this. They bring in this valued guy in Ryan Kelly for a reason. And it's to be that kind of guy that McCarthy can lean on.
Yeah, I don't think that was an accident.
Yeah.
This actually ties a little bit into what I wanted to highlight, which was something about JJ. And it was that I had asked Kevin, like, what was the biggest change or growth he had seen from when JJ was entering training camp last year, obviously as a rookie, to now. And the first thing he brought up is how much more comfortable he is in the system. And I do think like we've talked about it and we've talked about like all the things he was able to do off the field, but really like, I do think it is going to have helped him so much that he was able to go through all of this mental side of the game and have a year with the playbook without like the pressure of also having to put it on the field at the same time as he's learning it. And so just to hear Kevin kind of say that's something that stuck out to him as well is just the grasp on the foundationals and what this system looks like. I'm really intrigued now to see like, okay, like, is he so strong in that like the on-field application is a breeze and he's able to get into it really quickly? Or is it still relying a lot on the veterans around him, Ryan Kelly, Aaron Jones, obviously in the backfield with him to kind of keep building? I'm sure there's going to be some of that no matter what, but the level to which we see that I think will be interesting.
Oh, and how does he handle the eventual regression? How does he handle the eventual bad day? These are all things that he didn't get to go through with the first team offense last year because he was throwing to Lucky Jackson with the third teamers through much of this stuff. So I think it's going to be fascinating because when you were talking about O'Connell's answer, it made me think of a different one of his where he also mentioned, I think somebody had started the presser by saying, hey, this spring, Harrison Phillips referred to Josh Allen, Harrison's former teammate, in saying that JJ's just got this kind of behind the scenes kind of, I think O'Connell called it a presence, just got the presence about him. And I think that emotional and kind of what seems to be an intellectual maturity for such a young guy at 22 years old would lend itself to being able to handle the eventual bad days that are to come here in training camp. But we don't know until he actually does it. We don't know until Harrison Smith picks him off twice in a row how he's going to bounce back the next day. But it seems like he's got the head on his shoulders to handle it.
Yeah, I mean, the level to which he talks about growth, and you hear so much discussion, especially among younger people who are kind of going through this stage of life where you're going through failure for the first time in a fairly major way, where you're in a more competitive environment and you're in a situation where you don't have things mastered because you are in the adult world. And this, I think, goes beyond just football. It goes beyond just sports. You hear about this all the time of what are you going to do? How are you going to respond when you deal with failure, when you're met with that for, maybe not the first time in your life, but something that has significant consequences. And the idea of training a growth mindset and encouraging a growth mindset, I think is something you hear a lot of discussion about. Certainly something I think about when just raising kids, but he seems to have a pretty good sense of that, at least the things that we hear him say in public settings. So I think if that is there and that is, part of how he thinks about it, and that failure is not something that is actually a bad thing if you can learn from it. I would tend to think that he's as well equipped to deal with that as anybody, but it's easy to say that on July 21st or whatever it is. And it's another thing if you've had 2 or 3 bad practices in a row, and we're asking about it every day, and fans are getting all the Twitter, pardon the pun, if they're out of practices and all of those kinds of things.
This is also this whole failure talk. It's good for me as I enter my first full season too. It's not just the football field; it's in the Vikings press room as well.
Yeah, I can remember a lot of things in my first days in a beat. My first pro beat was baseball, but yeah, just even in that setting, like the number of things where that first year, like I had no idea what I was doing, and you just learn a lot. So I'm sure everybody goes through that in any career that they're going through. And I think if you're going through that in any other job, I think it's safe to say that effect compounds when you're doing one of the most difficult, most complex jobs in the world, probably the most difficult and complex in pro sports.
Ben, any other takeaway that we haven't mentioned from today?
I think the thought process that you hear from them a little bit in terms of the more is required stuff that we heard from Jonathan Grenard, nobody's shying away from that. I mean, nobody is sitting there saying, well, that was last year. This is new. We have to see what this team is going to look like. There's very much, I think, an understanding that 31 wins in 3 years doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot when it's led to losing as favorites in the playoffs twice. And you heard Kevin O'Connell talk about kind of this invisible mindset.
Invisible presence.
Yes, which was an odd kind of ethereal thing for him to say, but this just understanding of this, where we've been is not good enough, and we want to take this to a place where the payoff is a Super Bowl. And I think the way they went about it this offseason, the way they have gone about really just about everything in the last couple of years would tell you that this is not a group that is content sitting still. I mean, these two guys have brand new contracts. Both have multi-year deals. Kevin O'Connell's, we know, goes through 2029. This group is going to be around for a while. They have a fair amount of security, but I think it's interesting to hear them kind of taking the opportunity to turn up the urgency. I mean, they don't seem to really be trying to downplay that for their own preservation. I guess they kind of are saying, yeah, we do expect that this has to be better than it's been, or shame on us. I mean, I think that is unique, just given the fact that they're both in situations where you look at it and say, there's quite a bit of security here, but they're not talking about it that way. So I just think it's interesting to hear that thought process spoken out loud.
Yeah, Kevin O'Connell called it their organizational journey. So it's not just the quarterback journey. We got the organizational journey here, where they're at in that organizational journey. They will not say the two words Super Bowl, but yes, you got to win a playoff game first. That might help. But it's a fascinating dichotomy that we're talking about here, because they mention, and Kwesi says, we've got a very veteran defense, and they actually have a very veteran offense too, except for that young quarterback who you don't want to, who I'm sure Kevin probably doesn't want to put too many expectations or too high expectations on, right? And so Kevin's already talking about, and I should have mentioned this, Emily, when you mentioned what else stood out, but I thought for a moment there, Kevin was already trying to sandbag against the game manager label for a second. And he was already, it's July 22nd, as Ben mentioned, and we were already kind of getting into they're all game managers. And so I thought that was interesting. It's like, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's not to say that JJ needs to be any more than that in year one. But this team is built to only need that. This team is built to make a run. This team it feels like in their organizational journey, they are there and ready. And that's the fascinating dichotomy to me, is that you probably don't want to heighten expectations too much on the QB, but the team, as you guys say, is well ready to say, yes, we're ready to take that next step.
Well, it makes me wonder a little. I mean, I thought back to last training camp, and some of this was necessity. I mean, obviously Kyrie Jackson and the football effects of him dying last July, Mekhi Blackman gets hurt, tears his ACL day one. But what was it, 7 or 8 defensive backs that they signed during the course of that training camp, including I think 6 that they acquired in the first week, and then Stephon Gilmore comes in later. I do wonder. Well, I don't think I wonder. I think if they find a situation in the next 5 or 6 weeks here where they say this can make us better right now, I wouldn't expect that they're going to be shy about it. Now, we've talked a little bit about the draft picks going forward and them wanting to stay in this situation where they're kind of comp pick positive, I think would be where you're going to get more picks than you give up. So that plays into a little bit of the thinking there, but they are going to have they're probably going to have the top comp pick again next year, and they'll have more draft picks towards the top of things. And contracts and financial situations are trickier going forward. They're going to be trickier in 2026, but if they find the right situation to make an addition to this roster and they can make all the numbers work, I don't think they'll shy away from that, because I think if they're looking at corners, for example, and saying, hey, we still need help here, I think they're going to be on the lookout for that, because there is a little bit of this expectation of this, even though it's a young quarterback, there's no reason it can't be now.
Yeah, that's a good point. And a good transition as well to wrap up here. We'll talk a little bit more about this on our next episode, which, if I have my calendar right in my head, is going to be Friday, the day before fans get to come out to training camp for the first time. But we get to watch our first day of practice tomorrow. It'll be non-padded, of course, but we get to see the guys out there. What is everyone's kind of what are you watching at training camp? What's your one big thing that you're going to have your eyes on? I know for me, it's the secondary. I was going to say just the cornerbacks at first, but I think I have obviously interest in the secondary and the safeties because of Josh Metellus, but also because of Theo Jackson and expecting him to take on a bigger role with the contract extension he was given this year. So kind of that whole secondary group, I'm really interested to see how it shakes out and what it looks like in this training camp.
Yeah, Ben, what about you?
Well, I mean, McCarthy's the obvious, but I think we've talked about him enough.
Yeah.
And obviously the offensive line and how that plays into things as well. I mean, the battle between Blake Brandel and Donovan Jackson, Kevin O'Connell alluded to that a little bit today. That's going to be, I think, very interesting to watch how they allocate that. Do you start Blake Brandel first, knowing that there's some optics that come along with it, or do you just give it to Donovan Jackson right away? My guess is it'll be Blake Brandel, just to try to keep the lid on things and make Donovan Jackson probably go out and earn that job rather than handing it to him. But I'm curious about that. I'm curious about really both lines of scrimmage, I guess, with Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen, how that changes things up front and how they use those guys. That's more when pads go on probably, but I think that whole thing is going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, it's JJ McCarthy, obviously, but then beyond that, the defensive line, you hit it for me. I mean, it looks like on paper an incredibly deep group. If the two older guys and Allen and Hargrave can stay healthy, they could maybe actually have the rotation they keep talking about year after year. Every year we go into this saying, and even this goes back to Mike Zimmer, when they thought they could have waves of guys, and then we get there and it'd be like, no, we're really good with Everson Griffin or Sheldon Richardson on the field. We can't take them off, And so now they add Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins to a depth group that they kept in Levi Drake Rodriguez, Taki Taimani, Jalen Redmond. You add the two new starters, obviously, that we just mentioned. And so this is a group that you're going to have to cut, theoretically, one of those guys, because they're not going to keep 7 interior defensive linemen, you'd think. And maybe they do. Maybe these guys are so good that they hoard a bunch of them. So this will probably be one of the strongest groups that Brian Flores has had positionally across all of his positions on defense. And I'm really fascinated to see how that plays out, because we talk about McCarthy being a game manager. Well, it's going to be a lot easier if if offenses, can only score 15 or 20 points on.
Yeah.
If you're coming out to training camp, let us know in the comments who you're going to have your eye on, player-wise, position-wise. That's all we have for you guys today, but rest assured, the next few weeks and months and years and whatever, we have so much content coming, it feels like, just both through training camp and then getting into the season and then the off season, because it rolls right into the draft season and all of that. We're back in the content bus is what I mean to say, is we will be here for you for the next couple months. You can, of course, find our written work on startribune.com, but we also will be doing a lot of video stuff, especially throughout training camp, over on our Instagram at Strib Sports. We're going to do some videos, making sure that you guys have things to watch each day, that you'll be out at training camp. You'll hear from all three of us about those different ideas and what we point you towards as you come out. And of course, we will talk to you again very soon here on Access Vikings. Thanks for tuning in. Ben, what was the story you were going to tell?
Oh, this is kind of takes a little bit of a setup, but there was a receiver. This must have been 10 years ago. I mean, I remember us joking about this on the sideline of Mankato. There's a guy named Markin Michelle. You remember this?
Yeah.
So I would jokingly refer to him. So his first name was Markin, Marken.
Okay.
And last name was Michelle, like I think Michel, like Sony Michelle was spelled. So it made me think of like in the early days of the internet when, basically I think you had to pay for email addresses, and you just had all of these people that didn't really know what they were doing yet. So it was like, okay, there'd be a husband and wife couple that would have to just get one. And the email address is send it to both of us, and it goes to all these people. So I would always jokingly refer to him as Mark and Michelle at AOL.com, because it sounded like a couple, like a 35-year-old couple that was.
This is Mark and Michelle.
Mark and Michelle at AOL.com. It sounded like you would expect, somebody that just first got an email address to do that. So Emily's like,
I was going to say,
email addresses. What are you talking about? But,
no, I consider myself like pretty in tune with the evolution of technology and like what was here before. Like, you can show me an old piece of technology and I'm not going to be one of those Gen Zers that's like, oh, I've never seen that in my life before. But I've never heard of having to pay for an email address.
I think that was how that worked. I mean, we're talking like, you had to pay for minutes on AOL. I know that. So
okay, that makes sense.
There was different levels. I remember Netscape was like my first, and there's different levels of Netscape email. You could pay for it. There was a free version. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Hotmail was like, I think my second email.
Hotmail was my first.
I think I had a Netscape first or something back in the days of. Did you ever dial up internet?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm asking Emily. Did you ever?
Oh, sorry.
No, there's no way, right?
I don't think so. My the first computer I ever did anything on was like a big brick Mac that my dad had in our office, but I don't remember. I would have been very young.
Yeah, I can't imagine that you would have by that point. And like we had to go through the phone line and it made all the screeching noises.
It goes,
it was awful.
Yeah.
I'm glad I delayed this to the end.
When you
are we still recording?
Yeah, you kept it on. I saw it was still on there. So yeah, that's what I was thinking of. So it's a bit of a long setup for that, but yes, that was always like, dog days of training camp. You're just sitting there trying to find something to pass the time. And I remember us joking about Mark and Michelle. When we're doing roster checks, the 90-man roster checks, you just come up with your kind of running little jokes to keep yourself entertained and keep yourself sane or something like that. But that was one of those back in the day in Mankato.
That's a good one. That's a good poll.